By the way, you mentioned the Estrela do Sul. It's currently at display at the V&A in London, which is an amazing opportunity to see a really rare Brazilian diamond. Well, our next guest speaker is, according to my mother, the most good-looking one. It's me. So I'm not going to introduce myself. I would just ask to just put my presentation on screen. Otherwise, I can just stuff sausages while it's not in there. It's there already. So yeah, my talk will be quite similar. Not this one. My talk will be a little bit similar to Ioannis, but I will focus not on designers, that's not me, but I could use the hat sometimes, not on actually on designers, on modern high-end value gemstones like Cuprian albites, etc. I will focus on the historical part of the birth of the cholera gemstone industry here in Brazil. So if you care to put my PDF, which has the flowers, the colored flowers, please. Well, they are searching, but I can start telling you that thank you very, very much. Oh, it was my fault. I need this. So when the Portuguese arrived in Brazil, more than 500 years ago, we found this. So it was only parrots, mosquitoes, trees, no caipirinha, unfortunately. You will have caipirinhas tonight, but not at that time. Well, our good friends, the Spanish, is there any Spanish people in the room? Well, the Spanish, they were actually in their own possessions in Southern America. They were having gold, silver in Potosia, Bolivia, platinum. People didn't care much about platinum, but they had it. Of course, emeralds in pre-Columbian artifacts, and pearls, natural pearls from Venezuela, Panama, etc. And the Portuguese, we kept with this in Brazil. No caipirinha at all. So there's something had to be made to change things. And the Portuguese king, he managed this adventurous campaigns of very tough men like Wim Vertius, very big guys, went into the main desert of Brazil, desert meaning with no inhabitants, looking for precious metals and precious gemstones. And eventually that happened over time, over a few periods of time. After many, many trials and errors, they found gold in 1690s. And you can imagine if you find gold on the ground, you immediately start looking at the ground, looking for something else. So more and more gold was found, mainly very small grains of gold that you could just smelt and make coins, make money with it. Sometimes nice nuggets, sometimes huge nuggets. This is security camera. I tried to sneak one out. I couldn't from the royal collection. So interestingly, the royal family, they kept some nice mineral specimens. So the gold was there for melting, for making money, but also for the education of princes and to keeping natural history, which is quite interesting if we go back 200 years or more. So gold was a main thing. And of course, if you look into the ground looking for gold, you eventually find diamonds. And that's what happened in 1710, officially 1720s. But we do have a record of finds of diamonds that predate the 1720s. If you are book geeks, nerds, the GIA library has a reading list by Jim Shigley with a lot of literature on the prehistory of Brazilian diamonds. And it's on that documentation that lots of information can be found. By the way, Jim is doing that kind of literature lists for each and every gemstones. It's a powerful, powerful tool for research. And eventually, of course, you look into the ground, you found diamonds, and you eventually find other gemstones in the decades that followed. So diamonds, they were, as we all know, really an important asset for Brazilian wealth. Because at that time only India and Borneo, Indonesia, as we call it today, were the main producers of diamonds, and Brazil overtook them in terms of quantity. It was a huge, huge quantity of diamonds, and I think much of it has been really well documented elsewhere. This is a cholera gemstone congress, so I will just skip the main information about diamonds. I'm just showing you some rough diamonds that we still keep at the Royal Collection in Lisbon. And I invite you all to visit Lisbon and to visit our Royal Collection. It's pretty good. By the way, this is not a brown diamond. This is almost a colorless or near colorless diamond, type 2A, still with oxides on the outside. So it's really a cool example on how you can find rough diamonds in an alluvial environment. So some people were saying at the museum, let's clean it up, with acid. And we said, no, this is really rare. This is museum quality. There is a lot of information, a lot of stories that we can tell just of those brownish little bits of diamonds. Of course, we do have a lot of colored diamonds in the Royal Collection. This is probably the most important one. It's a brownish 31 carat one. But Brazil is mostly known not for the brown stones. And Ioannis, he pointed out one of the greatest examples of it. Brazil is known for the red diamonds. This is probably one of the most important red diamonds in the literature, in our ancient history of gemology and diamond values. This is the Hancock red. It has a big story, reportedly from Brazilian origin, and it has been bought by $13,500 a few decades ago, when it was sold for almost $1 million a carat in the 1980s, making a big thing about colored diamonds that became not only a curiosity for collectors, but valuable things as we understand them today. So Brazil is known for unique red diamonds. Of course, we know Argyle red diamonds, but Argyle is not producing anymore, as you know. So Brazil is still today one of the main producers of extremely rare red diamonds. There is one currently at display at the Smithsonian. I don't know if it is Brazilian origin or not. I think there is an article coming up with a study on this. I'm looking forward to read it, to learn if there is information, but possibly this really amazing red diamonds over 2 carats might have been originating from Brazil. So Brazil is known for the best red diamonds in the world. Also, the discovery of diamonds in Brazil made a huge impact in jewelry. This is jewelry before Brazilian diamonds. Lots of gold, lots of articulated design, only a few diamonds, mainly rose cuts, table cuts, but small, flatty diamonds. Another example, gold, a lot of gold work. If you were working on a jewelry workshop, you had a lot of gold artisans and not that many gem setters, because there were not that many gemstones to set. Well, from this almost sculptural jewelry, the amounts of diamonds that became available in Europe from Brazil changed the way design became as a fashion in the mid-1700s. By the way, look at the backs of a jewelry piece. This is how jewelry was a very high craft. Gemstones, particularly diamonds, they changed this up until the Art Nouveau jewelry, when jewelry making recovered the sculptural dynamic of jewelry. And this is one of the last examples of pre-Brazilian diamonds jewelry. A lot of gold, rose cuts, only a few diamonds. And this is pretty much how we can define diamond jewelry before the Brazilian diamonds. Then there is a transition period, about 2 decades, give or take a few years. And in this transition period, you have loads of diamonds, but still it's not established as a very important, very voluminous gemstone. So there is more, we can find more diamonds in the jewelry design. We can find less metal. We don't find that much metal anymore. We still see the rose cuts, because those were the style of cutting that is originating in the 17th century that was still the cut of fashion in the early 18th century. And then, after this transition period with less metal, a little bit of more gemstones, but still rose cuts, we arrive in the middle of the 1800s, of the 1700s, sorry, and then significant availability of gemstones, diamonds all over the place. And jewelry changed into this. So you have, by the way, brilliant cuts. Although it's a second half of the 17th century style of cutting, it became popular only in the 1750s. And you can actually design the whole piece of jewelry only using gemstones. Why do you need artistic metal goldsmiths? You don't need them anymore. You need diamond setters. You need gem setters. That changed completely how jewelry was designed, how jewelry was made. So the impact of Brazilian diamonds in jewelry is massive. Changed completely how jewelry was made. Again, you don't see metal anymore. Metal became like a structure to hold as many gemstones as they were, like in this beautiful ring. So, and I can show you more and more of volume numbers of Portuguese jewelry. By the way, this is French, but this is a statement, by the way. This was made in 1755, 56, right after our earthquake. We had an earthquake in Lisbon that destroyed everything, but the King of Portugal was still the beers of the time. So he was still the lord of the diamonds. And he had to make a statement to Europe saying, hey, we are still strong. So he sent over more than 1,000 diamonds. And he made, ask Jacquemin, that had this big name. He was jeweler of Louis XV of France. And they made this snuff tobacco box. It's quite a sizable one, solid gold, filled with diamonds. To say, hey, we are still in Portugal, the Lord of Diamonds. So this is a political kind of jewelry, making a nice statement. What I want to say is, in the 1750s, we don't see much metal anymore. Metal becomes more silver than gold. And brilliant cuts, they become the style of cut of fashion. This is how important Brazilian diamonds were in the ways jewelry became a fashion after the 1750s. Well, but we are here talking about colored gemstones. This is just to summarize what I've said. If you want to put it in perspective, this is what happened. Well, but we are here on a ICA, colored gemstones. But colored gemstones were found because people were looking for diamonds and gold. And eventually in Minas Gerais, where this beautiful land, and I don't know if you have visited Ouro Preto, but it's a beautiful city. I know that, André, you are from the area, so you know exactly how beautiful this is. And around Ouro Preto and other Minas Gerais areas, lots of colored gemstones became available. And from that time on, there was so much quantity and variety of colored gemstones for Portuguese, and by the way, Brazilian jewelries by the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, especially when Prince John, the Regent John, João, Príncipe Regente, arrived in Europe because we were running away from Napoleon, from the French army. After that, jewelry became more important as a national manufacturing work of art. And jewelry became quite colorful. While in Europe, a lot of paste glass, colored glass, was being used, and by the way, doublets, to make up color, well, the Portuguese and the Brazilian, we had locally in mind colored gemstones to make colorful pieces of jewelry. This is only a brief list of what became available in the 18th century as far as gemstones. Topaz, beryls, mostly aquamarines and almost colorless beryls. Also, curiously, not tourmalines that much. And also varieties of quartz, rock crystal, citrine, amethyst, red garnets, chrysoberyl, the greenish yellow variety that also Ioannis mentioned. So this was what became available. And it was, in many instances, those gemstones were not as expensive as diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and sapphires, but they were custom cut for the type of jewelry designs that were popular at the time. Flowers, leaves, vegetalistic motifs. So all the cuts, instead of just cutting round squares, rectangles, things were cut on a way that then jewelers, they could use those gems to just make beautiful leaves, branches, flowers, because that was the fashion. That was what people expected from a jewelry piece that was sometimes embroidered on dresses, which is an amazing thing. Well, this is from your mind, isn't it, André? From Capão? As Ioannis said, topaz might have been the most important gemstone that was discovered in Brazil, in the Ouro Preto region. Sometimes they were yellow, sometimes they were of this color, and he showed up a wonderful example of it. We do have also some wonderful examples in Lisbon, if you care to visit. This is a rose-cut imperial topaz, and let me use the word imperial as a Brazilian term, but as Ioannis also said, some people also defend that it is actually from Russia, from the Sarnaca deposits in the Urals. But I'm in Brazil, let me call this imperial because imperial is Brazilian. So this is a rose cut, and I tend to believe that rose cuts in colored gemstones, especially topaz, they are more in line to the primordial decades of the 18th century, 1740, 1750, than the ones that were cut by the end of the 18th century, that they were cut with with a crown and a pavilion. The rose cuts are more ancient than the other cuts are. So this might be a nice indication. Like in this 1745-50 piece of jewelry, look at the cut of the topazes, rose cuts, which is quite unusual today, but it was not unusual in the 18th century. As Ioannis also said, foilbacks were really common on those days, just to make the color a bit better, which is the case. This is a light pink topaz with a red foilback, but sometimes was also, as we saw on Ioannis' examples, orange or yellow topazes, and maybe they wanted to enhance it with a more reddish tone. And as you can see from this image, that's the real color of the topaz, but the perceived color is pink or reddish. And now I ask you, is foil backing a treatment or just a jewelry practice? Well, this is a good discussion, because once you take it out of the setting, there is no impact on the color of the gemstone. But according to Sibjo, foil backing, colored foil backing, is considered a treatment and should be disclosed, of course, when the gemstone is set. More examples of Portuguese jewelry using topazes, all with foils. The foils all have color. And sometimes you see normal necklaces that went from a private, normal usage to a more devotional, religious use. So we see a lot of religious implements that are embellished with gemstones and with elements of pieces of jewelry. We see that all across country. As you can see, that is the very same necklace on that monstrance. Also, today we see late 18th century jewelry using Brazilian topazes, collar and with no collar, being used creatively as a tiara. So those were earrings, a ring, and a breastplate, but all of a sudden, it's a nice, very posh tiara for a wedding. Well, moving on, ladies and gentlemen, topaz is not only yellow or pink or orange. The vast majority, actually, it is colorless. We don't see colorless topaz anymore in jewelry as much as we did 200 years ago. And by the way, they were locally called pingo d'água, drop of water. That's what it means. Because today, and by the way, some more examples of colorless topaz. Because today, most colorless topaz, as most of you know, is treated mostly with irradiation and heat treatment, or even with coating to become any other color, but blue being the most important one. And colorless topaz is not as sexy as it used to be as a gemstone, as it was 200 years ago. Today, colorless topaz is almost useless and modern jewelry, but also there is much more value making it blue than leaving it as it is, as colorless. And as Wim really said, you will add value when you treat to those much fashionable colors. So it will add value. It's economically interesting to have blue rather than have the colorless, which is a nice positive way. Well, another important color gemstone of Brazilian origins is chrysoberyl, greenish yellow, yellowish green chrysoberyl, that in Portuguese and Brazil you can say crisólita or crisólito. You can translate into chrysolite, but actually in Europe chrysolite is more peridot, which is olivine, as most of you know. So we'd prefer to use chrysoberyl, but you still see in a lot of historical descriptions the way chrysolite in many spellings, Portuguese or even English. And those chaps are, in the Portuguese market, they are so popular. Also in auction houses, and Ioannis is the real expert, but they can reach out really high values. And interestingly, those are also foiled, but with no color. But then the culettes are painted black. And we will talk about painted culettes as well. Well, this was a movie, and it doesn't move anymore because it's a PDF, not the keynote on Mac. But if you can see the shapes, the outlines of the cuts, those are actually made on purpose just to fit the flowery motifs, which is really a good thing. Custom cut today is luxury. In those days, it was a normal practice to serve the jewelers that needed those cuts to make their own very popular designs. All of those buttons are, if you look carefully, only the central stone is round. All the others, they are custom cut to make those round fillings. And one question, do you see metal? We don't see metal anymore in jewelry. The same with diamonds. Jewelry is a structure of silver, predominantly silver, but also gold, just to hold gems, because there were a whole lot of gems, colored gemstones and diamonds in huge quantities. And this is what jewelry became because of Brazilian colored gemstones, and also, by the way, because of Brazilian diamonds. Well, more use of chrysoberyl. I can stay here forever talking about these things. As most of you know, I don't shut up. Well, this is a beautiful, this is about this size, guys. It's huge. Look at the cuts, all custom cuts. You have chrysoberyl with foil, not color. You have topaz with color with foil. You have only 2 diamonds. Do you see metal? Jewels became gems because of you, because of Brazil. And I think this is really a cool story. And more, let me tell you, just a side note. Jewelry and gems today are less and less about the product and more about the story. And if the story is a truthful one, and if it is a good one, and a positive one, then we will have a better chance of thriving as an industry. So going back to the presentation, aquamarine. Originally in Portuguese jewelry, we see a lot of greenish beryls that sometimes people would hardly call them aquamarines because they are greenish. By the way, this is what we think is called the Bragança diamond. Some of you have heard about it. 1,680 carats. It's supposed to be a diamond in the time of the Prince Regent. Then in many books as a topaz. This is in the royal collection. It weighs approximately that amount in gram, and possibly why the king would keep a pebble of aquamarine. You can see the hexagonal shape over there. And possibly this is the Bragança diamond. Well, but let's move into aquamarines in 18th century jewelry. And this is a monstrance. Look at the color of the aquamarines. Green. It's not blue. We do see blue, deep blue aquamarines in Brazil, beginning of the 20th century. Also in the late 19th century in the Urals, Russia, but not in previous times. Predominantly green. As most of you know, today, it's a common trade practice to heat beryl, greenish beryl, so you can inhibit the yellow component that causes the green, so the blue comes better. Possibly they were not heat treating those beryls on those days. But as most of you also know, heating aquamarine is an undetermined treatment. It's really hard or barely impossible to check it under normal gemological conditions. So whenever we see greenish, possibly it hasn't been heat treated. But this is just a speculation. But interestingly, aquamarines were not that popular in jewelry, although we see a couple of them in 18th century jewelry. What we do see in bigger quantities are near colorless beryls. Well, we know that colorless beryl is a Gaussianite. Actually, if you care to see, there is a little bit of blue in there because I'm illuminating that with some type of light. But if you use the Chelsea color filter, if you are a gemologist, you know exactly what this is. Then you can check it will give a green color under the filter, meaning there is actually something there that tells us this is a very pale aquamarine, not Gaussianite. Gaussianite is actually extremely rare as a gemstone, is a more collector stone than a gemstone. Another example, you see the color? There is a little bit of blue, but if you just see from a glance, looks like a colorless gemstone, but it is not. This is a highly important monstrance in central Lisbon, near the place I live. It's quite big, almost as big as I am. So some of you say, no, so it's not big enough. But all of those colorless gemstones is a mixture of diamonds and beryl, which is amazing. You use a Chelsea filter and everything turns green. It's amazing. Gemology is very exciting. Well, moving on, and I don't have that much time in here to entertain you because I want you to have a longer coffee break. So amethysts, as Ioannis rightfully said, was not a common gemstone. It was pretty much uncommon. In Minas Gerais, a few examples were being found, but not in the quantity that became available in the early 19th century with Rio Grande do Sul material. And also then after Uruguay material. The German families in Ida Oberstein, they know exactly what I mean because they had at the time very strong relationships with that part of Brazil, exporting gems to Ida Oberstein. Well, but amethyst became more common, but not yet as common as it became. If we look carefully into the amethysts of those days, they are all foiled. Of course, we have closed settings, but there is always a colored foil for two reasons. You could see homogeneity of color, so you can have monochromatic designs, and also they would appear to be better than they are, like makeup or a hat for me. When you see this aura of a devotional statue, you see that all of those amethysts, and if you look carefully to the color, you have a diversity of colors. On those days, to make a set of amethysts of all the same color, today is possibly a no-brainer. You can have like 100 carats or even more of calibrated colored amethysts. Not in the 18th century. You needed the foils to make them look all of the same color. By the way, those three citrines are natural color, not heated. And if you know your gemology, they will have pleochroism. So you can see dichroism really well on those two specimens. The most abundant gemstone was actually colorless quartz, rock crystal as we call it, but really big quantities of them. And occasionally, not very abundant, also almandine pyrope garnets, the reddish ones that we also see in significant quantities, but more so in the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th. Well, because for Brazilian gemstones, foil backs were important, just a little note, a little bit more than usual. Well, the pink that you see on those diamonds, and by the way, unfortunately, this wonderful box was stolen in Paris last year. I think it was in November. It's made of Silesian, so Polish chrysoprase, but that color is a foil. Those are not fancy pink diamonds. It's a colored foil underneath a closed setting of those diamonds. As for colored gemstones, as I've said, colored foils were also very common. In this monstrance, if we look carefully, in the middle of the stone, we can actually see that topaz is very light yellow. It pretends to be orange because it has a foil giving it an orange color. because orange looks better. And also, if you foil everything with the same color, you have homogeneity. How do you say that in English? Homogeneity. You know what I mean. Everything of the same color. Yeah, the same word, right? In here, it's really evident that the foil is degrading over time. The pigments were organic, so they don't last for 250 years. And this is really clear that we see the light yellow color of this wonderful Ouro Preto Brazilian topaz with an orange, almost reddish back. Again, on those leaves, we see colorless topaz and colorless topaz with a red foil. So everything there is colorless. None has any color. Well, just a little detail before I go. Sometimes we see those black dots in colored gemstones. In fact, they have a reflective foil. And then, can you see the culet? Can you see the dark area? Well, the outline of the culet is like that. That is paint. That is a black paint that is made into that. This is a quartz, just to pretend that there is an extinction area over there. And we see a lot of that also in chrysoberyl, painted culets, also very typical of late 18th century, early 19th century Portuguese and Brazilian jewelry using Brazilian gemstones. This is just an example that we took at the Antique Art Museum in Lisbon. The gemstone was taken out. We can see the foil and we can see the gem with the black dot. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Portuguese jewelry, Brazilian jewelry with colored gemstones. It is a feast of color. Thank you very much. Wonderful presentation, Rui. It was really, really good. Thank you. Can you go back to your seat? Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. We will have a longer coffee break because lunch was quite squeezed. So I'm really grateful that we could all be compacted in our sessions. I hope that you are back here at 4:15, okay, sharp. Otherwise, the bell will ring on your ears. Thank you very much. See you after coffee break.